The microphone was still warm from the last toast when my daughter's father-in-law stepped forward, straightened his jacket, and smiled at the crowd the way a man smiles when he thinks he has already won. He said, "And of course, we cannot forget Claire's mother, a woman who raised her daughter entirely alone." He paused, letting that word land heavy. Entirely. No husband, no help, no family name worth mentioning. His smile widened. It really is remarkable what determination and, shall we say, necessity can produce. The laughter that followed was nervous and confused, the kind that comes from people who aren't sure if they just heard a joke or a wound. Claire stood beside the wedding cake with her hands clasped tight, and I watched her face go still the way a child's face goes still when they are trying not to cry in public. My ears rang. My chest went cold, but I did not sit down. I stood up slowly, the way I have stood up my whole life when things tried to knock me over, and I looked at my daughter's father-in-law, a man named Mr. Harrison, and I said clearly so the whole room could hear me, "Do you actually know who you are speaking to?" His smile stopped working. His face shifted in a way I had not expected. Not embarrassed, not angry, afraid, and in that moment, looking at his fear, I understood something that had been pulling at the edge of my memory since the very first evening I met this man. I knew him. Not as Mr. Harrison, not as the wealthy real estate developer with the expensive suits and the manicured hands. I knew him from somewhere older, somewhere darker, somewhere he had clearly spent a great deal of money and effort making sure nobody would find. The question I could not yet answer was simple and terrifying. What had he done? And what would he do to my daughter, if I said it out loud? I raised Claire alone, and I say that not to ask for pity, but because it is the most important fact about who I am. Her father left when she was 3 years old. I came home from a 12-hour shift at the hospital, where I worked as a nurse, and found a note on the kitchen table. 3 sentences, no return address. I stood in that kitchen for a long time holding the note, and then I folded it and put it in the trash, and I went to check on Claire sleeping in her crib. From that night forward, it was just the 2 of us. I worked double shifts when I could. I took night classes to move up to charge nurse so I could make a better wage. I drove a car that made a sound like a dying animal every time I turned left. And I kept driving it for 4 years because a new car meant less money for Claire's school clothes, and Claire's school clothes mattered more than my embarrassment. There were nights when I sat at the kitchen table after she fell asleep and stared at the bills spread out in front of me and thought, I do not know how to get through this month, but I always found a way. Not because I was extraordinary, because I had no other option, and that is its own kind of strength. Claire grew up knowing what it meant to work for things. She was the girl who saved her birthday money, and the girl who thanked her teachers by name, and the girl who stayed late to help classmates study even when she had her own studying to do. She became someone I was proud of every single day, not just on the good days, but especially on the hard ones. When she met Daniel at a nursing conference, she called me the same evening, still smiling through the phone. "Mom, I think I met someone worth meeting." I remember exactly what I said. "Tell me everything." Daniel was kind. He called me to introduce himself before Claire even asked him to. He showed up to family dinners early and helped clear the table without being asked. He looked at Claire like she was the most interesting person in any room. I trusted that look because I had learned to read it. Then he said, "My father would love to have you both over for dinner." And something very small and quiet in my chest said, "Wait." The Harrison home was the kind of house that was designed to remind visitors that they were guests and not equals. Tall ceilings, cold marble floors, art on the walls that cost more than my yearly salary, chosen not because anyone loved it, but because it communicated the right things to the right people. Mr. Harrison greeted us at the door with a handshake so firm it crossed the line, from confident to calculated. His eyes did a sweep of me that lasted less than 2 seconds. Hands, clothes, posture. He filed me away like a document. "So you're Claire's mother," he said. Not a question. A categorization. "I am," I said. "Just the 2 of you, I understand." He smiled, and the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. "And what is it you do?" "I'm a nurse. I was charge nurse for 14 years at St. Michael's before I retired." "How practical," he said. That word, how practical, said in exactly the tone that means the opposite. Dinner was fine the way a business meeting is fine. Pleasant surface, sharp underneath. He asked Daniel about his career goals 3 times and asked about Claire's once, and that once was phrased as a follow-up to a question about Daniel. He referred to his own father's legacy twice in the first 20 minutes. He talked about the family name the way some people talk about religion, reverently and often. In the car afterward, Claire reached over and held my hand in the dark and said, "Mom, I'm sorry." I said, "You don't need to apologize for him. He was rude. He was afraid," I said. And I wasn't completely sure yet why I said it, but it felt true. That night, sitting at my kitchen table, I tried to place him. There was something about the way he spoke, a particular rhythm, a way of looking at people like problems to solve. I had encountered that before. I was nearly certain I had, but the memory wouldn't come forward cleanly. It stayed at the edge, like a word you know but can't say. I let it go. I should not have. Over the next year, Mr. Harrison made his feelings clear in the way that wealthy men often do when they want to show disapproval without creating evidence. He forgot to include Claire on the family email about Thanksgiving plans. He sent her a gift card for the holidays instead of a present, the amount exactly half of what he sent Daniel's cousins. At a birthday dinner for Daniel's grandmother, he seated Claire at the far end of the table away from the family, next to an elderly neighbor who didn't remember anyone's names. Each thing was small. Each thing was deniable. Together they formed a message as clear as anything written down. "You do not belong here." Daniel saw it. He pushed back when he could, but Mr. Harrison had a talent for making his son feel ungrateful when he stood up for himself. Daniel had been raised to believe that questioning his father was a form of ingratitude. That belief ran deep, the way beliefs do when they are placed in a person young. Claire never once asked Daniel to choose. That was the kind of woman she was. But I watched her absorb those small insults, and I watched her keep them in a place where she thought I couldn't see them. I saw them. One evening she came to my apartment after a Sunday dinner at the Harrison house, and she sat on my couch and said, "He told Daniel that I'm not the right fit for the family." I sat down next to her. "He said it like I was a piece of furniture in the wrong room," she said. I pulled her close, the same way I had when she was small and the world had been unkind. "Listen to me," I said. "His opinion of you is not your value. His opinion of you is his limitation." She nodded, but her eyes were wet, and I held her until the tears passed, and after she left I sat alone, and I thought about Mr. Harrison and the way his eyes had moved across me at that first dinner, categorizing, filing, dismissing, and I thought about where I had seen eyes like that before. Still, the memory would not come all the way forward. 2 weeks before the wedding, Mr. Harrison requested a private lunch. Just the two of us. I recognized the move. I had seen it in my years of hospital work. When someone in authority wants to manage a situation quietly, before it becomes public, I went because I wanted to understand what I was dealing with. We sat across a white tablecloth in a restaurant where the menus had no prices. Mr. Harrison ordered wine I did not ask for and waited until it was poured before he spoke. "I want to be direct," he said. "I think you're a reasonable woman." "I try to be," I said. "My son is going to inherit a significant amount of responsibility. His grandfather's company, the properties, the long-term investments. The woman he marries needs to support that kind of weight, not add complications. Claire is one of the most capable people I've ever met," I said. He smiled thinly. "I'm sure she is. I'm also sure she comes from a different world than the one Daniel is entering." He folded his hands. "I'd like to make this simple. I've arranged for a transfer. Enough money for you to help your daughter start fresh somewhere she's comfortable." He slid a folded paper across the table. I looked at it, and I did not touch it. "You're trying to pay me to move my daughter away from the man she loves," I said. "I'm trying to spare everyone difficulty," he said. "Keep it," I said. I stood up. "My daughter is not a complication, and she is not for sale. Neither am I." His composure flickered for just a moment. His eyes went to my face and he stared at me in a way that felt like recognition, not the recognition of someone he'd met recently, but something older, something that made him uncomfortable. He said, very quietly, "You're certain you don't remember me?" I stopped. "Why would I remember you?" I asked. He looked away. "Forget it. Enjoy the wedding." I drove home with those 5 words sitting in my chest like stones. "You don't remember me," said not as an introduction, said as a fear. I went home and I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold, and I searched that sentence and I searched my memory, and somewhere at the very back of my mind something began to move. I did not tell Claire about the lunch in full. I told her Mr. Harrison had been unpleasant and that I had handled it. She did not need more wait in the days before her wedding. But I noticed things in the 2 weeks that followed. The florist called to say the deposit check had bounced, except Claire had never written a check. Someone had called and provided false information. The venue sent a confirmation email with the wrong date, one that would have caused the entire event to be rescheduled. And when Claire called to fix it, the coordinator mentioned a man had called to change it the day before. A small envelope arrived at Claire's apartment, containing a news article, old and printed on plain paper, with no return address. The article was about a woman who had been accused of insurance fraud and later cleared, but someone had circled the word accused in red pen. Claire brought it to me shaking. "Who would send this?" she asked. I looked at the postmark. Local. I looked at the article date. 15 years ago. I looked at the circled word. Someone was trying to plant doubt. Someone was trying to make Claire look unstable or dishonest before the wedding even happened. "Don't let it touch you," I said. "It's meant to scare you." "It's working," she admitted. I squeezed her hands. "That's what it's designed to do. That doesn't mean you have to let it win." That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark thinking about Mr. Harrison, and the way he had asked me if I remembered him, and the way his composure had cracked for 1 second at that lunch table, and I kept pulling at the thread of that memory. And sometime around 3 in the morning it came loose. 27 years ago I had been a younger nurse working at a hospital in a city 2 hours from where I lived now. I had moved there fresh, trying to build something after Claire's father left. It was a smaller city with a tighter healthcare system and a hospital that was underfunded and understaffed and held together by the people who worked there, who cared too much to quit. There had been a man, a hospital administrator of sorts, though administrator was a generous word. He was a consultant brought in by the board to cut costs. His name had been Richard Stowe. Richard Stowe had arrived with a leather briefcase and the kind of smile that made you feel evaluated. He cut supply budgets. He pushed for shorter patient stays. He reclassified staff hours to avoid paying overtime. He dismissed every concern raised by nurses as emotional overreaction. I had raised a concern directly. A patient on my floor had been showing signs of infection, and the protocol he had implemented cut the response window in half. I had documented it. I had reported it through the appropriate channels. I had put my name on it. 3 days later, he had called me into a meeting with the department head and presented what he called evidence that I had been misreporting patient hours. It was fabricated. The records had been changed. I had no way to prove it easily. And he knew that. I had nearly lost my nursing license. I had fought back. I found a colleague who had witnessed the original records. I found a second colleague who had been in the room when Stowe made a comment that showed he knew the documentation was false. It took 4 months and cost me sleepless nights and money I didn't have for a consultation with a healthcare attorney. But I kept my license. Richard Stowe left the hospital shortly after. I heard he moved on to another city. I heard he reinvented himself in real estate. I never heard his name again. I had not thought about him in years because surviving something and moving past it is how people stay whole. But lying there in the dark at 3 in the morning, I finally placed the eyes. Richard Stowe. Same sharp inventory when meeting someone new. Same thin smile. Same habit of making discomfort look like concern. Mr. Harrison was Richard Stowe, and he knew I had been the one who stopped him. On the morning of the wedding, I pulled Claire close and I said, "Today you hold your head up the way I taught you. If anything happens, do not let anyone see you shake." She looked at me. "What are you expecting to happen?" "Probably nothing," I said. "But I raised you to be ready." The ceremony was beautiful. Genuinely, quietly beautiful. Claire and Daniel said their vows with the particular honesty of 2 people who mean every word. Daniel cried first, which made Claire laugh through her own tears. And that small moment of laughter in the middle of vows was more real and more moving than anything choreographed could have been. I sat in the front row and let myself feel it. 31 years of working and hoping and holding this girl up when the world tried to push her down, and here she was in white, radiant and sure of herself, standing across from someone who loved her. I let myself have that. Then we moved to the reception, and Mr. Harrison picked up the microphone. I have already told you what he said. I will not repeat all of it. The essential fact is that he stood in front of 400 people and used a public moment meant to celebrate his son and my daughter to remind the room that I was lesser, that I had come from less, That Claire had been raised by someone with no family name worth mentioning, no husband, no help. And that was when I stood up and said, "Do you actually know who you are speaking to?" His fear told me that he did. I did not say Richard Stowe's name in that moment. I had learned in my years of nursing that acting on information without thinking through the consequences is how good intentions cause damage. I sat back down. I watched him recover his composure and make a weak joke about wedding nerves, and I watched the room force itself to laugh. Then I went to Claire. She was shaking. Daniel was holding her hand so tight his knuckles had gone white. I wrapped my arms around her, and I whispered, "Look at me. You are not embarrassed. You are witnessed. There is a difference." She pulled back and looked at me, and something in my face steadied her. Daniel said, "I'm so sorry. I didn't know he was going to do that." I looked at him. "I know you didn't. But Daniel, you need to understand what your father is willing to do. This was not a bad joke. This was a choice." Daniel's jaw tightened. "What do you mean?" "I mean he has been trying to end this marriage before it could settle," I said. "The florist, the venue, the envelope, and now this." I kept my voice low so only the three of us could hear. "And I mean that I know who he used to be." Daniel stared at me. I told him. Quietly, clearly, standing in the corner of the ballroom while the DJ played something cheerful and oblivious. I told him about a man named Richard Stowe and a hospital 2 hours away, and a nursing license almost lost, and a fight I had won 27 years ago that a powerful man had apparently never forgiven. Daniel sat down hard in his chair. He looked like someone had taken the floor away. "He changed his name," Daniel said. "People do sometimes," I said. "Sometimes for business, sometimes to start over, sometimes to make sure the people they hurt can't find them." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "He told me once that he had worked in healthcare consulting early in his career. He said it hadn't worked out. He never explained why." "Now you know why," I said. Claire said, "He tried to have you fired. He framed you." "He tried," I said. "He didn't succeed." Daniel looked at both of us, and I saw something shift in him. Not anger exactly, though that was there too. A clearer kind of seeing. The kind that happens when a story you have been told your whole life stops making sense. He said, "What do we do?" I said, "We have options. We can do nothing, and let tonight end and deal with it later. Or we can address it now while the evidence of what he did today is still in this room." Claire looked at me. "What do you want to do, Mum?" "I want to protect you," I said. "That's all I have ever wanted." "Then tell me what the right move is." I thought about it. I thought about the florist and the false bank information, and the venue call and the envelope with its red-circled word. I thought about the microphone and the 400 people and the thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. I thought about a hospital 2 hours away and a younger version of myself sitting in a meeting room trying not to show fear. "We tell the truth," I said, clearly and calmly, to the right people, not as a scene, as a statement. I found one of the venue's security staff, and I asked her to contact the coordinator because I had information about ongoing harassment that I needed to document. I used those words specifically. Document. Because documentation is what protects people. The coordinator was a composed woman of about 50, and she listened without interrupting while I explained the florist call, the venue date change, and the envelope. I showed her the envelope on my phone. Claire had photographed it. The coordinator said, "Do you want to involve law enforcement?" I said, "I want to speak with them." Yes. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. They came quietly and they spoke with me first. Then with Daniel. Then with the florist contact I had saved, who confirmed by phone that a man claiming to be Daniel had called to create a false payment dispute. Meanwhile, Mr. Harrison had been watching from across the room. I could feel his attention the way you feel weather changing. He approached. He waited until the officers had stepped away briefly, and then he came to stand beside me and his voice was very low and very careful. "You're making an error," he said. "I have lawyers that you cannot match." "You probably do," I said. "If you say that name, I will make sure the story that gets told is yours. I'll tell them you had a grievance from decades ago. I'll tell them you came here tonight to cause a scene. I'll tell them you've been filling my son's wife's head with old bitterness." I looked at him steadily. "Richard." He flinched. "Richard Stowe," I said again, not loudly, just clearly. His face went the colour of old paper. I was 29 years old and alone with a 3-year-old daughter when you tried to take my nursing license, I said. You fabricated records. You lied to a department head. You tried to destroy my career because I filed a legitimate patient safety report. I beat you then, and I will tell the truth now. He was very still. You changed your name, I said. You reinvented yourself. You built all of this. I glanced briefly at the room. And then your son fell in love with my daughter. Of all the people in the world, your son chose mine. A muscle moved in his jaw. I am not your enemy, I said. I never was. I was a nurse doing her job. But you have treated my daughter like a problem to remove for 2 years, and you stood at a microphone today and humiliated me in front of everyone she loves. And now, I am going to tell the truth about who you are, because that is what I should have done the first evening you looked at my hands to decide if I was worth your respect. He said nothing. The officers returned, and one of them addressed Mr. Harrison directly. He had no good answers. Not to the venue call. Not to the florist. Not to the envelope. And when the coordinator produced the call log from the venue showing the number used to change the date, and when the florist confirmed the same number had called them, the sequence became something that required an explanation he didn't have. I did not shout. I did not perform. I said what was true in the plainest sentences I knew, and I let the plainness do its work. The rest of the evening was not a celebration in the conventional sense. There were statements given, and reports taken, and phone calls made. Guests sat in uncertain clusters, some leaving quietly, some staying because they didn't know what else to do. Daniel's grandmother, a small upright woman of 82, who had said very little all evening, came and sat next to me near the end and said, I always knew my son would do something like this eventually. I'm sorry it happened at your daughter's wedding. I looked at her. Did you know about the trust? She did not seem surprised that I asked. William set it up specifically because he knew Marcus wouldn't hand Daniel anything freely. William was my husband. He understood his son better than Marcus ever knew. She folded her hands in her lap. The trust goes to Daniel when he's married. It always did. Marcus has known for years. He couldn't stop it from existing, so he tried to stop the marriage. Why Claire specifically? I asked. Why wasn't any woman acceptable? Because any woman Daniel truly loved would be a loyalty that competed with Marcus's control, she said simply. It was never about your background. It was about the fact that Daniel loves Claire. That alone made her the enemy. I thought about that for a long time. Mr. Harrison was not arrested that night. That is not how these things work, and I had known it wouldn't be. There were reports filed and investigations pending, and lawyers who would complicate and delay the way lawyers do when they are paid enough. But something had shifted that couldn't be unshifted. 400 people had heard him take the microphone. A smaller number had heard him approached by police. Fewer still heard what I said to him in a low voice near the edge of the room. But in the days that followed, the story spread the way true things spread, unevenly and unstoppably. The name Richard Stowe, attached to the man now known as Mr. Harrison, surfaced in conversations that found their way to former colleagues of mine, and former colleagues of N eventually, to a journalist who had already been looking into a pattern of financial irregularities in a property development company bearing the Harrison name. I did not plan that. I only told the truth to the people who asked me. Daniel and Claire moved into their apartment, and they built their life the way people build lives when they have chosen each other freely. It was not easy. Daniel had spent 30 years learning to see the world through his father's framework, and unlearning that takes time. He went to therapy, which he told me about plainly and without embarrassment, and I respected him for that more than I can say. The trust cleared in full once the marriage was verified, and the legal challenges his father attempted were found to have no merit. Mr. Harrison did not come to the small celebration Claire and Daniel held 3 months after the wedding. It was 50 people this time, in the backyard of Daniel's grandmother's house, with mismatched chairs and paper lanterns and food that everyone brought. The grandmother sat at the center of it, looking pleased in a way she had not looked at the wedding. At the end of the evening, Claire sat down next to me with 2 slices of cake on one plate the way she used to do when she was small, and we were splitting dessert because one portion was enough for both of us. She gave me 1 fork and kept the other. You know what I keep thinking about? She said. Tell me. That moment when you stood up. She looked at the fork in her hand. Everyone was waiting to see what you were going to do. I was waiting. And you just stood up like it was the obvious thing. Like of course you were going to stand. It was the obvious thing, I said. I want to be like that, she said. I want to just stand without thinking about whether I should. I looked at my daughter, 31 years old, sitting in a borrowed chair in a backyard full of people who loved her, and I thought about the little girl with the colouring book at the diner counter, the girl who returned lost wallets, the girl who had cried on my couch and said, "He told me I wasn't the right fit." "You already stand," I said. "You stood through 2 years of being made to feel like less, and you never once let it make you into something smaller. That's harder than standing up at a wedding." She rested her head on my shoulder, the way she had since she was 3 years old. We sat there in the warm evening, eating cake and not saying anything else, and the lanterns swayed overhead, and somewhere across the yard Daniel laughed at something his grandmother said, and I thought about all the years of working, and the leaking roof and the car that made that sound when you turned left, and I thought about Richard Stowe in his leather briefcase, and his fabricated records, and his particular talent for making good people feel small. He had not broken me then. He had not broken us now. And sitting there with my daughter's head on my shoulder, I knew the real lesson that all of it had taught me. Not the lesson about standing up, though that mattered. The deeper one. The people who try hardest to diminish you are always afraid of exactly what you are. They see your strength before you fully see it yourself, and it frightens them into cruelty. The answer is never to become smaller. The answer is to stay exactly who you are, and let the truth do what truth always eventually does when you give it room. It speaks, and when it does, no amount of money or marble floors or thin smiles can stop it.